The nightmare Nahar faced on that abandoned railway was only a shadow of the truth. Meher's secret, the hidden diary, and the ancient darkness that refuses to stay buried, everything has led to this moment.
You should not watch alone. Like, subscribe, and share with our loving friends.
Welcome back to Horror Story World. Today we reveal the final confrontation that changed everything. The truth is coming for Nahar, and this time, there is nowhere to hide. The mystery continues. Right now, one wrong decision can change an entire life. That night, Nahar knew the one standing outside the door was not human. And yet, deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that if he didn't open the door tonight, he might lose her forever. After that terrifying night, no one in Nahar's house could sleep peacefully anymore. As soon as the Maghrib prayer ended, Nahar's mother locked every door and every window. It felt as if someone was watching them. Nahar sat quietly inside his room. Suddenly, from somewhere in the distance, a child began crying. The sound was faint, fragile, helpless. The crying slowly came closer. A tiny voice spoke. "Uncle, please open the door. I can't find my mother." Nahar's mother shivered. "That's a child," she whispered. The scholar stepped in front of the door. "No, if it truly is a child, it will call again. And if it doesn't..." Outside, the crying sounded even more desperate. "Uncle, I'm so scared. Please open the door." Nahar's heart twisted with pain. "I just want to check. Sit down." A few moments later, the crying suddenly stopped. Then, a silence settled over the house. Suddenly, bang! A tremendous blow slammed against the front door. The entire house shook. Bang! It sounded as though something outside was trying to smash the door down. The pounding continued several more times. Then, without warning, everything stopped. Nahar peered through the window. The courtyard was empty, but in the wet mud, the footprints were unmistakable. Not one pair, many, and every single one of them faced the wrong direction. The scholar's voice was barely a whisper. "This is not a good sign, because she no longer wants you only for herself. She has called for help." The battle had truly begun. No evil is born overnight. Every darkness has an origin, a death, and a history so terrifying that people are afraid to even speak of it. That day, Nahar heard that history for the first time. At first light, the scholar left the house with Nahar. Today, he carried no talisman, only a small copy of the Holy Quran. They continued farther north along the river. Nahar had never been to this place before. Here, the river was much narrower. An unnatural silence filled the area. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because not every answer lies beside that river. Some answers are hidden inside this silence." They stopped before an old grave. Many years ago, this is where the strange events first began. The scholar spoke slowly. "There was once a young man who visited the river every evening. He claimed he had met a mysterious young woman. Within a few months, the young man began wasting away. Every night he left his home, returning only before dawn." Nahar swallowed hard. "Did he also..." The scholar nodded slowly. "Yes, one night, he disappeared." "Was his body ever found?" 3 days later, they found him on a sandbank, but that wasn't the most terrifying part. The men who prepared his body and said that even in death, he was still smiling. A chill ran through Nahar's entire body. "You are not the first, Nahar. She has chosen others before you." At that very moment, A familiar laugh drifted across the river. Beyond the veil of mist, a figure dressed in a deep blue sari stood silently. She simply smiled. Then, very slowly, she raised one hand, beckoning him. Come. Nahar's feet instinctively tried to move. Lower your eyes. Nahar flinched. When he finally looked up again, the figure was gone. She has seen us today. Now, she won't wait any longer. As they walked back, Nahar couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following them, not even for a single moment. Some dreams end the moment you wake up, but some dreams only begin after your eyes open. That night, Nahar's dream led him to a place so terrifying that when he returned, he could no longer trust even his own eyes. From the moment evening fell, Nahar felt strangely unwell. His head was heavy. Again and again he had the unsettling feeling that someone was standing very close to him, watching. His family urged him to rest, but sleep refused to come. His eyes remained open for hours. Then, sometime deep in the night, without even realizing it, Nahar drifted into sleep. Suddenly, he felt himself walking. But where? Thick fog surrounded him. Wet grass brushed beneath his feet. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of water. Nahar looked around and slowly realized he was standing beside the river. The same river, but it was no longer the river he knew. The water had turned unnaturally dark. There were no ripples, no movement. It was perfectly still, as if the river was not water at all, but a giant black mirror. Then, through the mist, the girl in the blue sari slowly appeared. Tonight, there was nothing monstrous about her face. She looked exactly as she had in the beginning. Calm, beautiful, but her eyes carried a deep, unbearable sadness. Nahar spoke softly. Who are you? The girl remained silent for a moment. Then she answered in a quiet voice. If you knew what I truly am, you would hate me. Then tell me the truth. She turned her gaze toward the dark water. The truth does not always set people free, Nahar. Sometimes, the truth is what traps them forever. Nahar stepped closer. Do you want to kill me? For the first time, he saw tears shimmer in her eyes. She slowly shook her head. No. Then why have you ruined my life? She did not answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed toward the river. Nahar looked down at the water, and his heart froze. His reflection was gone. The black surface showed something else. An old railway track, dense fog, and that terrible night, when he had first seen the shadowy figure. The image slowly changed. Now, someone was standing beside the railway, crying. The face was unclear. Only the sound of sobbing echoed through the mist. Before Nahar could understand what he was seeing, the girl whispered, It did not begin that night. It began long before that. Nahar stared at her. What do you mean? But before she could answer, the fog around them began to spin violently. The air turned ice cold. The girl's expression changed instantly. Fear filled her eyes. She looked around desperately. No. He's here. Nahar's voice trembled. Who? For the first time, the girl looked truly terrified. She grabbed Nahar's hand tightly. Leave now. If you're too late, you will never return. At that exact moment, heavy footsteps echoed through the fog. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was getting closer. Closer. But no one could be seen. The girl stumbled backward, trembling. The fear in her eyes was unlike anything Nahar had ever witnessed. Then, two enormous red eyes ignited within the mist. For a single moment, the entire world was drenched in crimson light. The girl screamed, Run, Nahar! And then, everything went black. Nahar jolted awake in bed. His breathing was rapid. His entire body was drenched in sweat. He looked around the dark room, confused. Was it only a nightmare? Or had he truly gone somewhere and returned? Then his eyes fell upon his right hand. 4 long scratches marked his skin, as if sharp claws had torn through it. The blood had dried into dark red lines. Nahar's chest tightened with terror. He had been asleep. So where had those marks come from? At that very moment, the call to Fajr prayer echoed from outside, and Nahar realized something horrifying. From now on, he was no longer unsafe only when he was awake. Even in sleep, he was not beyond their reach. Some people return from the edge of danger, but some people return without ever truly coming back. That was exactly what began happening to Nahar. Even after the call to Fajr prayer echoed through the village, Nahar could not sleep. The 4 scratches on his right hand kept appearing before his eyes. Again and again, he washed his hand carefully, but the marks remained. Dark, deep, unmistakable. Later that morning, the scholar returned to the house. Without saying a word, Nahar extended his hand. The scholar examined the scratches for a long time. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "It has reached you." Nahar's father asked anxiously, "What happens now?" The scholar remained calm. "Now, we have very little time left." A heavy silence filled the room. Nahar finally spoke. "What if I never meet her again?" The scholar nodded slowly. "Then your chance of survival will increase. And if she comes to me on her own, you must not speak to her." Nahar lowered his eyes. After a moment he said, "There is one thing I don't understand." "What is it?" "If she truly wanted to kill me, she could have done it long ago." The scholar looked deeply into his eyes. "Because she does not want your death." Nahar frowned. "Then what does she want?" The scholar answered quietly, "She wants you to go with her willingly." The room fell silent, colder than before. That afternoon, Nahar sat beside the window. Suddenly, his eyes drifted toward the mango tree in the courtyard. Someone was standing beneath it. A blue saree, long dark hair. The same girl. She was simply watching him. Tonight, she did not call his name. She did not smile. Nahar closed his eyes, then opened them again. No one was there. His heart pounded. Had he truly seen her, or was his own mind beginning to betray him? As night descended, Nahar's body grew unnaturally cold once more. But this time there was no knock on the window, no whisper outside the door, no footsteps. That silence felt more terrifying than any scream. Around midnight, a faint voice reached his ears. "I never wanted to hurt you." Nahar's chest tightened. The voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from somewhere far beyond the house. "Please, believe me." He immediately covered both ears with his hands. The scholar's warning echoed in his mind. "Do not answer." But the voice returned. This time it sounded as though she was crying. "If you do not come, he will never let me go." Nahar froze. He? The girl had never spoken of anyone else before. Then who was she talking about? Was she afraid of someone too? Nahar said nothing. He kept his eyes closed and remained silent. After a few moments, the voice faded into the darkness. The next morning, Nahar told the scholar everything, every word, every whisper, every plea. When the scholar finished listening, his face grew even more serious. Slowly, he spoke. "Now I am certain." Nahar asked nervously. "Certain about what?" The scholar looked toward the window. "The one you have been seeing all this time is not the true power behind this darkness." Nahar's breath caught in his throat. The scholar continued. "She herself is trapped under someone's control." Nahar stared at him in disbelief. Then all at once, a terrifying realization struck him. The face he had feared most, the face he had believed to be the source of all evil, might only be another victim. The scholar lowered his voice. Our real enemy has not revealed itself yet. Silence swallowed the room once again. But this time, only one question remained in everyone's mind. Who was the true darkness hiding behind it all? Sometimes the one we believe to be our enemy is merely another victim, and the one we have never seen is often the most terrifying of all. That day, Nahar discovered a truth from which there was no turning back. From the very next morning, an unnatural silence settled over Nahar's house. No one spoke. Everyone could feel that time was running out. After the Fajr prayer, the Alim called Nahar into the courtyard. For a long moment, he simply looked at him in silence. Then he said, "Today you must learn something I have intentionally kept from you until now." Nahar's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" The Alim took a deep breath. "The girl you have been seeing was not born evil." Nahar stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "She was once a girl from this very village." Nahar's throat went dry. "A human?" "Yes, an ordinary human being." For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. The Alim began to speak slowly. "About 30 years ago, a railway line was being built beside this village. At that time, there were very few people living in the area. One monsoon night, that girl disappeared. They searched for her everywhere, but she was never found. Several days later, her body was discovered in the marshland beside the railway tracks. Nahar listened without breathing. People said her death was not natural. Some believed she had been murdered, while others claimed it was an accident. But the truth was never uncovered. And after that, the Alim paused. After that, what? From that moment on, strange incidents began to occur along that same railway line during monsoon nights. Nahar's mind flashed back to the first night. 1 o'clock in the morning. Dense fog, a shadow standing on the railway tracks. He whispered, "Then, the one I saw?" The Alim nodded. "Yes, most likely it was her, but she told me she loved me." A shadow of sorrow crossed the Alim's eyes. "Perhaps she did. Perhaps she truly developed a weakness for you. But remember this, a soul imprisoned in darkness for many years cannot act entirely by its own will." Nahar sat in silence. He suddenly felt that the one he had hated for so long might have been longing for freedom herself. Just then, a violent gust of wind swept through the courtyard. Dry leaves spiraled into the air. Doors and windows began to rattle. Nahar rushed outside. In the middle of the courtyard stood the girl. Today there was no smile on her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. She looked only at Nahar. He took a step forward. "You?" In a trembling voice, she said, "I cannot protect you much longer." Nahar's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She looked around in terror. Then, in a very low voice, she said, "Tonight, he will come himself." The moment the words left her mouth, pain spread across her face. It was as if an invisible force was dragging her away. Desperately, she screamed, "After midnight tonight, do not go near the railway tracks under any circumstances. If you go, I will not be able to save you." In the next instant, a fierce wind rose. A whirlwind of fog formed before their eyes, and when the fog cleared, the girl was gone. Only a small silver anklet lay on the wet ground. Nahar slowly bent down and picked it up. His hands were trembling. The Alim hurried forward, and the moment he saw the anklet, he froze. The color drained from his face. In a hushed voice, he said, "If this truly belongs to her, then tonight will mark the beginning of the end." Nahar looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering once again in the western horizon. In the distance, the sound of a train whistle echoed from the direction of the railway tracks, but everyone in the village knew. No train had traveled on that line for many years, a place where a life ended many years ago. Tonight Nahar must return to that very place, but this time he is not alone. Beside him stands a man who knows that this night may be the last night of their lives. Before evening could fully fall, the sky was swallowed by black clouds. Lightning flashed in the distance. The scent of wet earth filled the air. The entire village seemed to have sealed its doors and windows before nightfall. No one dared to step outside. The Alim handed Nahar a small cloth-wrapped copy of the Holy Quran and said, "No matter what you see or hear, never lose your trust in Allah." Nahar silently nodded. His father stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not be afraid. Tonight we will not leave you alone." The three of them slowly began walking toward the edge of the village. As they approached the railway tracks, the atmosphere changed. The sound of crickets disappeared. Even the wind became still. In the distance, the rusted railway line lay hidden beneath a blanket of fog. Memories of the first night flooded back into Nahar's mind. It was here that he had first seen the shadowy figure. The Alim looked around and said in a low voice, "He is waiting for us." The moment he finished speaking, a cold wind swept across the railway tracks. The fog began to part slowly, and within it appeared the girl in the blue saree. Today, she looked far more exhausted than before. Her eyes were red. A deep sadness covered her face. Looking at Nahar, she said in a trembling voice, "Why did you come?" Tears filled Nahar's eyes. "To save you." The girl let out a bitter laugh and shook her head. "No one can save me anymore, but you can save yourself." Just then, a deep rumbling sound rose from beneath the ground. The iron rails began to shake. From somewhere in the distance came a terrifying sound like the whistle of a train, but no train had run on this line for years. Fear spread across the girl's face. She began to step backward. "He has arrived." Immediately, the Alim began reciting verses from the Quran aloud. The wind grew stronger within seconds. The fog swirled violently around them. Suddenly, two glowing eyes appeared in the darkness beyond the tracks. Slowly, those eyes began to move closer, but strangely, nothing could be seen except the eyes. It felt as though the entire darkness itself had come alive and was advancing toward them. Nahar's father stepped back in fear, but the Alim remained standing. His voice grew stronger. Each verse he recited seemed to shake the silence of the night. At that very moment, the mysterious girl suddenly stepped in front of Nahar. She spread her arms wide, as if she were trying to block something. A distorted growl echoed from the darkness. The girl screamed in agony. Her body began to fade like mist. Nahar cried out, "No, what is happening to you?" With the last of her strength, she looked at him and whispered, "Tonight, the truth must be revealed. Otherwise, no one will survive." Then, with a trembling hand, she pointed toward an ancient banyan tree beside the railway tracks. "There. All the answers." Before she could finish, a violent storm erupted. Dense fog swallowed everything. And a few seconds later, the girl was gone. Only the sound of her final sob lingered in the wind. Nahar stood frozen, staring at the banyan tree. He felt that beneath that tree lay a truth capable of solving every mystery. But before that truth could be uncovered, the darkness moved again. Every curse has a beginning. But what if the witness to that beginning has been buried beneath the earth? That night, beneath the roots of the banyan tree, Nahar discovered something that proved this darkness was no legend. It was the result of a crime hidden for decades. The storm had not stopped. Rain poured down even harder. The massive branches of the banyan tree swayed violently in the wind, as if giant hands were moving through the darkness. Nahar stood motionless. The girl's final words echoed again and again in his ears. "There, all the answers." The Alim slowly approached the tree. Looking around, he said in a low voice, "No one has touched this place for many years." When Nahar's father shone his torchlight on the ground, they saw the soil near the roots had sunk slightly. It looked as though something had been buried there long ago. The Alim said, "Dig." With trembling hands, Nahar began digging with a broken branch. After a few moments, thunk! He struck something hard. As they cleared away more soil, an old iron box appeared. Rust covered its surface, yet it was clear that someone had carefully hidden it there many years ago. With great effort, Nahar's father opened the lid. Inside were the matching silver anklet, a torn piece of a faded red scarf, and an old diary. Many of the diary's pages had been ruined by rain. Still, some words could be read. The Alim carefully opened one page. Written in trembling handwriting were the words, "If anyone reads this, know that I did not run away. I was taken to the railway tracks by force. If I do not return, tell my mother that I wanted to come home until my very last moment." Nahar's body turned cold. He whispered, "Then, her death was not an accident?" The Alim slowly shook his head. "No, it was a hidden crime." On another page they read, "The man who ended my life believes the truth will remain buried beneath this earth. But one day, this very soil will bear witness." Suddenly, the wind stopped. An unnatural silence spread across the area. Nahar slowly raised his head. Above them, on one of the banyan tree's branches, stood the girl. Even in the pouring rain, she looked clear. Today, there was no terrifying form. Her eyes were wet. She seemed to be crying. Looking down at them, she said softly, "Now, you know." In a trembling voice, Nahar said, "You were wronged." The girl nodded. Then, for the first time, she spoke her name. "My name is Meher." The moment her name was spoken, the air around them grew heavy once more. In the distance, a metallic sound echoed from the railway tracks. Tang, 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 as if someone were slowly dragging a piece of iron along the rails. The Alim's face instantly turned grave. He quickly closed the diary and said, "We must leave." Nahar looked at him in confusion. "Why?" The Alim replied firmly, "She allowed us to discover the truth, but the force that has kept this truth hidden all these years will not allow us to leave alive." At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed through the fog. Slowly, very slowly, but with each step, it felt as though the entire railway line trembled. Nahar understood. Tonight's battle was far from over. In fact, the real war was about to begin. The air beside the railway track suddenly grew heavy. It felt as though someone was slowly draining all the oxygen from the surroundings. Nahar clutched the diary tightly against his chest. The raindrops no longer felt cold. Instead, it seemed as if everything around them had fallen silent, waiting. Then, a long shadow slowly emerged from the fog. This time it was not just two glowing eyes. Its form began to take shape. It had no fixed face. At one moment, it resembled an old man. At another, a gigantic black figure. And then, in an instant, it dissolved back into the mist. A tremor ran through Nahar's chest. The Alim spoke firmly. "Who are you?" At once, countless voices echoed around them. Women, men, children, the elderly. All the voices seemed to speak together. "Humans call me by many names. Some call me a shadow. But in truth, I am the darkness that lives within human beings." As the words ended, the iron rails trembled violently. Nahar remembered the very first night, the night he had felt an unknown attraction standing in this very place. The Alim stepped forward. "Release Meher." The shadow let out a slow, chilling laugh. Even the air seemed to shake with the sound. "I did not imprison her. One of your own kind did." Nahar's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Suddenly the surroundings began to change. Before Nahar's eyes, a scene from many years ago appeared. A stormy monsoon night. Meher was running, trying to escape. Several people were chasing her. Their faces were unclear. Only the light of lanterns flickered in their hands. Crying in terror, Meher begged for help. Then, a shove. She fell into the mud beside the railway tracks. Darkness swallowed everything. As the vision faded, Nahar collapsed to his knees. His heart pounded wildly. He understood then. Meher's death had not been a supernatural accident. It was human cruelty. The Alim spoke softly. Because her injustice was never judged, this darkness has been feeding on her pain. At that moment, Meher's figure appeared once again. She looked at Nahar and said calmly, "I never wanted revenge. I only wanted someone to know the truth." Tears filled Nahar's eyes. "I promise you, the truth will not remain buried." For the first time in many years, a trace of peace appeared on Meher's face. But in that very moment, the dark shadow roared with terrifying fury. The fog rose like a violent storm and covered the sky. Cracks began to spread across the ground. Branches of the banyan tree snapped one after another. The Alim began reciting verses from the Quran aloud. The shadow screamed in anger. "If the truth is revealed, my power will be destroyed." In the midst of the storm, the diary was ripped from Nahar's hands and thrown onto the railway tracks. At that exact moment, the sound of a train whistle echoed once more, but this time it was closer than ever before. Nahar looked up and saw a bright light tearing through the thick fog, racing directly toward them. But on this abandoned railway line, no train was supposed to run. The diary lay on the railway tracks, slowly soaking in the rainwater. With every passing second, the precious evidence risked being erased forever. Nahar stared at it without blinking. Just then, the blinding light within the fog came even closer. The railway tracks shook. The ground trembled. From afar, it seemed as though a massive train was charging straight toward them. But the Alim shouted, "No, it is not a train. It is an illusion created by that darkness." For a brief moment, Nahar closed his eyes. Then, gathering every ounce of courage within him, he ran toward the tracks. His father screamed from behind, "Nahar, come back!" But he did not stop. His feet slipped on the rain-soaked wooden sleepers. Still, he kept moving forward, only a few steps away from the diary. Suddenly, the fog began to take human shapes. 1, 2, then 10. Countless shadowy figures blocked Nahar's path. None of them had faces. None of them had eyes. Only black silhouettes. Together they whispered, "Go back. Let the truth remain buried. This is not meant for humans to know." Nahar froze. His chest trembled with fear. But then he heard the Alim's voice. "Do not believe the fear. Move forward." Nahar took a deep breath and stepped ahead. To his astonishment, he passed straight through the first shadow, then the second, then the third. Each one dissolved like smoke. He realized they were not real. They were only fear, created to stop him. At last, he reached down and picked up the diary. At that very instant, a violent bolt of lightning split the sky. A flash of white light illuminated the entire railway line. And in that light, Nahar saw clearly for the first time the enormous figure of darkness. It was not human, nor was it any creature known to the world. It was a twisted entity made of smoke, shadow, and black mist. At the center of its chest swirled a vortex of darkness. And within that darkness, countless faces seemed trapped. Some were crying, some were begging for help, some were stretching out their hands for freedom. The Alim spoke firmly. "Do you see now? Its power is born from human fear and injustice." Meher's spirit slowly appeared beside Nahar. For the first time, there was no pain on her face. She spoke gently. "Do not destroy the diary. Bring the truth before the people. Only then will my waiting come to an end." Nahar pressed the diary tightly against his chest. He looked at the darkness and declared, "No one will fear you anymore." The moment those words were spoken, the shadow let out a deafening roar. The trees on both sides of the railway shook violently. Long cracks split the ground beneath them. Suddenly, the Alim's voice changed. He looked at Nahar and shouted, "Leave now. Nahar stared at him in shock. You? The Alim spoke calmly. Someone must hold it back. If I retreat tonight, this darkness will never end. Tears filled Nahar's eyes. I will not leave you here alone. The Alim smiled faintly. Sometimes one person must stand still so another may survive. At that exact moment, the shadow lunged toward them with the speed of lightning. The sky shook. A blinding white light consumed everything, and within that light, the last thing Nahar saw was the Alim standing with both hands raised, and before him, a colossal wave of darkness. Then, everything disappeared into the light. The blinding light slowly began to fade. For several moments, Nahar could see nothing. All he heard was the roar of the wind and the distant sound of thunder. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw he was lying beside the railway tracks. The diary was still clutched tightly against his chest. But where was the Alim? Nahar stood up. He looked around and shouted, "Huzur!" No answer came. The rain had begun to ease. The fog had grown thinner. Then suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared in the middle of the railway tracks. It was the Alim, but he was not alone. Standing before him was the enormous black entity. Between them, an invisible force seemed to clash violently. The Alim was reciting verses from the Quran aloud. With each verse, the darkness trembled, yet it did not stop. Instead, it grew even more ferocious. Nahar tried to run toward them, but the Alim raised his hand. "Do not come closer. Protect the diary." Nahar's heart shook. He understood then. The diary was their final hope. At that moment, Meher appeared once again. This time, her body was no longer made of mist. She looked almost human. The helpless pain in her eyes was gone. Looking at Nahar, she said calmly, "Reveal the truth, not for me, but so that no innocent person will ever suffer such a fate again." Tears rolled down Nahar's face. He nodded. "I promise." The moment he spoke those words, the wet pages of the diary began turning by themselves. On the final page, one sentence became clear. "Freedom lies in the speaking of truth." At that very instant, the dark entity let out a horrifying scream. The fog around them shattered as if torn apart. Meher slowly stepped forward. For the first time, she looked directly into the eyes of the black shadow. There was no fear in her voice. "You used my suffering. You will never do so again." A burst of white light erupted from her body. The light pierced through the chest of darkness and spread in every direction. The shadow began to retreat. From within it came the cries of countless souls. It sounded as though years of imprisonment were finally breaking apart. The Alim recited the final verses aloud. The wind stopped. The rain stopped. The fog slowly vanished. The enormous figure of darkness shattered into tiny fragments of smoke and disappeared into the sky. Everything became silent. Only the scent of rain-soaked earth remained. Meher looked at Nahar and smiled gently. There was no peace in that smile anymore. Only peace. Softly, she said, "Thank you." Then her body slowly dissolved into particles of light. Within seconds, she was gone. Nahar stood in silence. Tears streamed down his face. He realized, not only had a soul found freedom that night, but a long-buried injustice had finally come to an end. The Alim slowly placed a hand on Nahar's shoulder. His face showed deep exhaustion, yet he smiled faintly and said, "Come. Dawn has arrived." Nahar looked toward the sky. The first light of the sun was rising in the eastern horizon. For the first time in many days, there seemed to be more light than darkness upon those railway tracks. The light of dawn slowly illuminated the entire village. The horrors of the night felt as though they had never happened. Birds were singing. The final echoes of the Fajr call to prayer drifted from the distant mosque. Nahar, the Alim, and his father slowly walked away from the railway tracks toward the village. No one spoke. All three knew what had happened the previous night could never truly be explained with words. Back home, Nahar fell into a deep sleep for the first time. After many long months, he saw no nightmares. No knocking came at his window. No whisper called his name in the darkness. It felt as though a heavy burden had finally lifted from his chest. In the following weeks, the Alim gathered the elders of the village and revealed everything. Everyone read Nahar's diary. The truth that had been buried for decades could no longer remain hidden. Several elderly villagers wept as they confessed. They had known parts of what happened that night, but fear, shame, and the judgment of society had kept them silent. That day, special prayers were offered for Nahar at the village mosque. Her grave was marked properly once again. Beneath the banyan tree beside the railway tracks, a small stone plaque was placed. It read, "When injustice is hidden, darkness grows stronger. Truth alone is freedom." Days turned into months. Nahar's life slowly returned to normal. He began working in the fields with his family again. He learned to laugh with people once more. He no longer feared the night as he once did. Yet, whenever the monsoon arrived, a strange emptiness would awaken within his heart. He would remember Nahar, and he would think, if someone had revealed the truth earlier, perhaps so many lives would not have been lost. One evening, Nahar went alone to the railway tracks. In his hands were several white water lilies. He silently placed the flowers beneath the banyan tree and turned to leave. Just then, a gentle breeze brushed against his face. He stopped. When he looked back, he saw, for a brief moment within the fog stood a familiar figure, a blue saree, a peaceful smile. Nahar. This time there were no tears in her eyes, no pain. She slowly bowed her head, as if offering her final gratitude. Nahar smiled softly and whispered, "May Allah grant you peace." In the next moment, Nahar's figure faded away like morning mist, and she never returned again. Time changes everything. Years passed. Rust spread further along the railway tracks. The old path became covered with wild grass. The new generation knew the place only through stories, that strange things were sometimes seen there on monsoon nights. Some believed the tales, others laughed at them. Then, exactly 1 year later, the monsoon returned. 1 o'clock in the morning. Heavy rain. Dense fog covering the abandoned railway line. A young man stopped his motorcycle and began a live video on his phone. Laughing, he said, "Everyone says this place is haunted. Let's see if there's really anything here." He turned the camera toward the railway tracks. The area was empty. He laughed again. Suddenly, for 1 second, a figure appeared on his phone screen. Far away. Someone was standing on the railway tracks. The young man looked up. No one was there. He looked back at the screen. This time the figure was closer. It was not human. It was a long black shadow. Its head was lowered. It did not move. The young man's smile vanished. His breathing became rapid. He tried to start his motorcycle, but the engine would not start. Then, a whisper came beside his ear, so low it was almost impossible to hear. People do not remember the truth, and that is why darkness returns again. The video on his phone began to shake violently. The screen filled with fog. Then, a terrifying scream. The live video abruptly ended. The next morning, a motorcycle was found beside the railway tracks. A broken mobile phone was found as well. But the young man was never found again. The police searched for him everywhere. No trace was discovered. Only one thing remained on the wet stones of the railway line. A pair of footprints. Footprints that faced backward. And even in the rain, they had not been washed away. People leave. Time changes. But some places, some nights, and some waiting never truly end. So if, on a monsoon night at exactly 1 o'clock, you ever find yourself beside an abandoned railway line, and someone softly calls your name, never turn around, because not every story has been fully written. Some stories are still being written.